It's a great honor to welcome a great friend of mine, a great friend of the festival, our 2014 tribute recipient, and now back to Los Cabos with an amazing film that really I'm obsessed about it, about Remember. Egoyan, thank you for being here, my friend.
Thank you. Gracias.
How does it feel? You were last year, maybe 2 months after the hurricane hit,
yes.
And I remember how touching was your speech when you received the tribute. You see a different Cabo now, I guess.
It's amazing, but it was a miracle last year. That was really such a testament to the will and the determination of the people who live here. It was like most people, we expected that the festival would be cancelled, but to come here and to see everyone working so hard and presenting this amazing event was really overwhelming. So, this year, obviously, we're seeing, it's all back to normal, but I'll never forget that experience. It was very emotional for me. It reminded me, I remember when I shot a film in Armenia in 1992, and it was after they had this terrible earthquake, and there was all the electrical systems were down. People were really struggling, and it's amazing when you make a statement that culture is truly one of the first things you have to reconstruct, and you have to be able to make a statement that this is why we're putting all this effort. Is to create this ability to share stories, and no, it was amazing. And now it's just a more regular event, but it's still incredible to have those memories.
It's we will be forever thankful to you, because it really the film festival last year was the first international event in Los Cabos, and all the local community got together to push it, defend it, and make it happen. And in a way, thanks to people like you who trusted us, who came to Los Cabos, even though we were barely standing, it got the international attention, and now Los Cabos is back in shape. So I'll be forever thankful.
Thank you. That means a lot. I had another experience. My wife and I were invited to be at a festival in Yamagata. It's a very well-known documentary festival every 2 years. And right before the festival, speaking of catastrophe, it was when the nuclear reactor exploded with the tsunami, and there was all this radiation. And maybe in that case, quite foolishly, we still went. And they were also incredibly moved by this. And I think it's just, you make a decision in your life that the privilege you have to make films, to share films, to go to festivals, that is something that is it determines a sense of who you are. For 30 years, I've been going to festivals. My career really started with festivals. And so when you see the spirit of a festival and what it aspires to, it's always, incredibly moving to me. Now, of course, with the younger generation of filmmakers who are working digitally, and there's so many films that are going out online, the festival is one of the few experiences where the filmmaker gets to still have that contact with the audience. And that, to me, is actually maybe the last bastion of cinema. We're still able to present in a public way and to have people look at our work on a screen and to share it. So, of course, the digital revolution is amazing because it means any filmmaker can shoot and edit, press a button, and have international distribution. But the reality is we still crave to have this feeling of gathering together and watching something and having a response, a collective response. And as the old system of the cinema distribution is changing every moment, these festivals become that much more important.
Last year we had a great panel with you, Robert Lantos, your producing partner. It was moderated by Toronto's Film Festival artistic director, Cameron Bailey. I was there, and it was one of my favorite parts of the festival.
It was funny.
Gerardo Gatica was there, your Mexican co-producer, and you were just teasing each other, right?
Yes.
Discussing Remember, actually, because for us it was important to discuss this film because it good example of the joint venture between Canada and Mexico. These films, although the lead producer is Canadian, Robert Lantos, it has the participation of a very relevant and increasingly important Mexican production company called Detalle with Muffelman and Gerardo Gatica. Tell us more about it, how this combination of financing partners came together.
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that, I've had good and bad experiences with financing partners. Some of the people are doing it purely for all the wrong reasons. And then sometimes you get to find producers and investors who are really attached to the product and to the artists involved. And so, with Gerardo and Alfredo and Moses, they were so excited about what the story was proposing and the possibility of this film. And it was really amazing to me when we had the premiere at the Venice Festival. They all came, and it was sort of a surprise, and it was great to share that. And it's been really fantastic. Last week I was at the Mar del Plata Festival, and we won the Audience Award for Most Popular Film. It was so incredible because I could feel it in the theater. It really, for the first time for me, because most of my films, as you know, are not linear, and they take an unusual approach to structure, and audiences need to have it filter in their mind, and they may not have an immediate reaction. This film is very different. This film is, even though it deals with all the themes I'm interested in terms of memory and trauma and how we construct reality and how we pursue justice. I mean, all these themes are in my films, but usually in a much more complex way. I felt that after The Captive, I needed to do something really simple and straightforward, and this was the perfect project. And to really work with a great performance, keep the camera very simple, and just focus on the possibilities of what this character represented. So again, we can't talk too much about the film until you've seen it.
You've seen it.
Oh, you've seen it. Okay, so you know. I didn't realize that. So you know then that there's this incredible surprise at the end, which you won't tell people, of course. I mean, but the thing is, it really makes you shocked. I don't know what the response was here, but when we showed it at Venice and when we showed it at Mar del Plata, there's a crucial scene where Zev, played by Christopher Plummer, shoots this neo-Nazi. And in Venice and in Mar del Plata, people started to clap and applaud. And I was a little surprised, but there wasn't what I was expecting. But I realized that those are the audiences that are most actually emotionally invested in the film, because they are feeling so concerned about Zev, and they're feeling that he needs to be protected, and they are applauding that he can protect himself. But then at the end of the film, we have to wonder, what is he protecting? And how implicated are we in that process of what he's been protecting or denying for his whole life? So it's an incredible shock to the viewer. But it's also something that they have an immediate response to. And so the Q&As at the end of the film have been really quite amazing, because suddenly this door is opened. And it's quite a quick and immediate sense of plunging into another space. Unlike, again, in my other films where it has to filter through the subconscious of the viewer in a very different way. So it's been a really good experience for me to really go back to a style I was using in my first features, and now wonder, okay, so what type of story do I want to keep telling? Because even though my own style favors this more non-linear approach, it's clear that it has its own limitations, that it becomes its own formula or its own cliche in a way. When I started working in this form in the late 80s and early 90s, it was quite new. You had a number of filmmakers who were beginning to explore, but now it's very you watch TV series like The Affair, or you look at Leftovers, or you look at these other series which are using this language quite effortlessly. And it's amazing to me that the viewer is able to keep up with that and have the concentration. But then it makes you wonder, well, then what is the feature film doing? What is the aim of a feature film in this new environment in terms of storytelling? Like, what is it that we're trying to do with this form? And I've come to realize that if you look at writers, you know, there are some amazing short story writers. In Canada, of course, we have Alice Munro, who won the Nobel Prize, but we also have, you know, incredible short stories coming from Mavis Gallant, Guy Vanderheek, maybe people you don't know, but I'm thinking also of William Trevor, and I'm sure, you know, that there are people who are masters of the short story form. And they don't write novels, they write short stories. And then there are people who are novelists who don't write short stories. And I've come to think that the feature film is the short story. You know, that the television series is clearly the novel, right? But the feature is the short story, and it bears a close resemblance to that. It's interesting, I produced a Sarah Polley's film, Away From Her, which was a short story. And yes, it's possible to do a translation of The Sweet Hereafter, which is extraordinary as a novel. But I look at Felicia's journey, and it was also really by a short story writer. So I've been thinking a lot about form, and I've been thinking a lot about what it is that the audience is expecting from the feature film, especially in the feature film drama. We know what they're expecting from the special effects and the action movies, and but what is an audience expecting to go to when they see and experience a drama in the feature form? And this is a big question. I think if I was in my early 20s, I'm not so sure that I would be making features or working more towards television.
I agree. Actually, this is you mentioned something very relevant to this fourth edition, because as a festival, as you know, trying to focus on the industry side and bridges between Mexico, US, and Canada, we opened Cabos TV this year, like a whole industry sidebar.
Right, I saw, yeah.
Focus on that, you know, like try to frame the discussion. And when I do interviews and they ask me, but what is this? What is this, the Cabos TV? I tell them, especially, it's a discussion we need to have as an industry, because a lot of creative talent from cinema is transitioning to TV, but it's not the regular episodic TV. Right now we're discussing the 13 episode format, which is now becoming a I don't know, the norm in this way. And Mexican producers and filmmakers are starting to explore that. We have even Canadian, Damon Oliveira,
yes, of course,
Negros,
sure.
is here. And for us, it's very important to discuss these new media, not just in terms of how narrative changes, but also in terms of how we consume entertainment as an audience, right?
Yes, and it's also important to remember the history of this. I mean, we often think that, you know, Twin Peaks was really the beginning of a filmmaker exploring the television form. But let's remember that before this, Fassbinder did Berlin Alexanderplatz. Let's remember that Bergman was doing Scenes from a Marriage. You know, that there is a tradition of feature directors using television in very innovative ways and needing that form to tell their stories. So it's been with us for a long time. And what's interesting is when you look at Berlin Alexanderplatz, there was a curious decision to shoot it on 16 millimeter because it was never meant for theatrical distribution. And yet it sustains itself as this extraordinary theatrical cinematic experience if you're committed to that, if you binge view, right? This is also this new phenomenon of, you know, people who watch an entire series in one go. So I don't think Fassbinder was thinking about this at the time, that people would watch Berlin Alexanderplatz as a 13-hour experience. But then, of course, he's coming from the tradition of a country that produced Wagner, you know, and the Ring Cycle. And these are, you know, immersive experiences into drama. And so it's not an entirely new phenomenon. It's just that it's been relatively, it's been put into a kind of a separate stream. But let's also think about this, that the feature film as a form is conditioned by the idea that in a cinema there would be two screenings, one at 7 and one at 9. So that, you know, its form is dictated by this industrial imperative to be able to have two servings, if you will, or two sittings for the project. And of course, when a film is delivered that's 3 hours, the distributors get panicked because how are they going to have those two different, you know, viewing experiences?
But now we're looking at a time where, because of the internet and because of, that we don't necessarily have to conform to these lengths at all.
Absolutely.
You can have an hour-long drama, you can have, a 65-minute drama, a 45-minute drama. And I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see that the whole pattern with which we've constructed how we watch things in terms of this incredibly rigid time structure is going to evolve. And again, what that means in terms of the cinema, does that mean that we're looking at schedules that are completely fluid, that there are screenings at 4:40 and 6:30? I'm not sure where this will all sit.
It will be a nightmare for programmers in theaters like this one, I guess. But it will definitely be closer to how audiences are really consuming them. Right, I think something that what you mentioned, Alexander Platt's type of narrative, it wouldn't be possible now to consume it that way if it wasn't for an OTT that allows you to have the whole thing, and that awful addictive. The next episode would play automatically in 15 seconds. Right. I mean that completely changes the way we consume it.
Yeah, and it also. I mean, it's very interesting that that these projects were designed. At the time, that there would be space, that we would immerse ourselves back into our life and then watch it again, the next week. And so we would have this interaction and allow that drama to filter through in terms of that space we had before the next screening. So the binge phenomenon. But I would then go again back to Wagner. I mean, it's interesting because I was involved with the Ring Cycle in Toronto, and this is a 20-hour experience that Wagner, proposed, and it was to happen over 3 consecutive nights. And in a way, it's a binge. It's like this complete immersive experience in this, mega drama. And I would say that I know people who watch The Wire that way. They watch, the David Simon's series, the five different years, and they will just go through it. And I would also propose that maybe, if you look at the Ring Cycle, the Ring as the greatest work of, the 19th century as an artistic statement, maybe the Wire, interestingly, is something that we will look at as the statement, the drama of our time at the turn of the century. Certainly, I think it provides this incredible forum, of ideas. Very rich piece.
I know that you reflect on all this. How about you? Are you planning on exploring writing or directing for a TV series like episodic 13 episodes format?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that I started, at the beginning of my career, in my 20s, I was very lucky to have these opportunities to direct television. I directed episodes of Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. As a matter of fact, I met... That's my soundtrack. I always bring it with me at a certain point. I just like to dance. Sorry. They were late. They were 5 minutes. Should be 5 minutes ago.
The timing. Come on.
So I met Martin Landau, who is in Remember. I met him doing an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I did the pilot of the Friday the 13th TV series. So I had this early contact with television, but it was always just as a way of paying for my feature films, so I could produce my own work. Then something happened which would have changed my career completely. In 1992, HBO optioned The Adjuster, my feature film from 1991, as a series. And I did the whole contract. I gave them the rights. At the time, I said creatively, I don't want anything to do with it. So they made a pilot, which didn't work. But I look back at it now, and I go, that would have been very interesting to do this film about a bisexual insurance adjuster, working with these different clients, putting them up in a motel. And then, of course, there could have been an episodic aspect to it. And it could have been like this very unusual series at that time in the early 90s, right after Twin Peaks and these, But I was so consumed with my feature career, and this was the time I was making Exotica and The Sweet Hereafter. I don't have any regrets about it, but it would have been a completely different direction. And I have to admit, I did not take it seriously because I felt I'd already made the film. Why would I go back into this world? But now it's interesting. I mean, I think if I had the idea as a young filmmaker, I would have pursued it as a series because it's a good idea. You know, it has its own, you know, episodic quality. You can see it in the film. I mean, there's these different characters he's meeting, and you could see how the branches would grow, as they have to do in a good TV series. The branches have to keep spreading out, you know. I don't know. It's come up a couple of times. There's a possible like book that I won't say what it is, but I'm looking at it, and it would be more like a limited series as opposed to a feature.
Like a mini series type of
yes.
thing. For me, what it's interesting, speaking about how these two medium, like a lot of cinema people are migrating, or at least going back and forth. But I'm wondering, even from the production side, I guess it's challenging because, I mean, you can commit to a film a whole year, right? And the process is, you know it, and it's very structured. But in a TV series, I mean, you're writing the first episode, you're shooting the first episode, but you're writing the last one at the same time.
But it's also
it's a completely different type of rhythm, I guess.
I think it is. I think I see it with my friends who do television. You are dedicating your life to it. You know, like a feature film. Yes, it's very stressful, but you're shooting maybe for 5-6 weeks. In a feature production, television production, that process is going on all the time, and I think it really takes. It's a long distance runner, you know, and working also, of course, as a writer, working in a room, working with other writers, the politics of that, and it would be completely. It's exciting. I mean, I love this idea that you are able to generate ideas with other people, and that you're all kind of completely focused on the narrative as it needs to kind of unfold, and assigning different stories to different writers. This is all, but it's completely outside of my experience. I've never been in that.
It is, but it's actually for me the most I'm more passionate about, you know, because. As a screenwriter, I think that TV series now are the real triumph of screenwriting because they are the showrunners finally, right? And you're a lucky guy because you direct and write.
Right.
But you know, in films, usually the screenwriter at some point, if it's not the director, they have to leave. You know.
But why is that? I mean, this is also very interesting. Why has it become that way? It's of course you're right that television is the vindication of the writer. As the creative, controller of the project, but I'm wondering why and how writers ever relinquish that in terms of the feature. And I think maybe again it's part of the marketing, that it was always easier to market the director as opposed to the writer as a cultural kind of presence. The director as being the person who's choosing the project, or the person who's actually being able to bring the actors on. But what we're seeing with television is that you have these incredible showrunners. The David Chases, David Simons, Matt Wieners. Like these are people who. And what's interesting is some of them said that they wanted to make features, but they're actually that passion has dissipated. This is funny. I met David Chase with his feature, and you can't compare the control and the influence that he has with a TV series as opposed to a feature, which is so much more problematic to bring into the world these days. It's very difficult to find, distribution. It's very difficult to create that dialogue, which they're used to now getting with a television series. So it is an extraordinary time of transition. It's true, yes, in early television we had these figures like Patty Chayefsky, people who were known as writers, and that there was this glorious moment when you had the best of Broadway or the playwrights, the dramatists making that transition to television. But that soon kind of fell away, and you had this incredibly nondescript television that I watched as a child, and most people saw of my generation, where it was entertaining, but you didn't think that it was the place to tell great stories. Now it is.
It is. We can talk hours and hours about TV. I love discussing this stuff with you. But going back to Remember, It is in fact a very different project, and it feels like it because once again, talking about writing, directing, you're going back to an experience where you didn't write the script. I knew the script a couple of years ago, and ever since I read it, I thought this is genius, right? Like it's very straightforward. You know, it has a magnificent, an amazing twist at the end. How does it feel again to go back to this experience of dialogue, right? Like interpreting a text that is not yours.
Well, I mean, I have done these projects where I was working with text that wasn't mine. I mean, like Chloe was an adaptation of a French film, and it had a very different sort of approach. Obviously, Devil's Knot was not my script as well. But this one was very different because it was really a completely original story. Ben August, proposes this character that we've never seen in any novel or any film I've ever experienced. It's really, not only is it an original character, but it would require a radical type of performance. It's a radical performance from Christopher Plummer because there's no subtext. Because of his dementia, he doesn't have any connection at a conscious level with his own immediate past, and yet the history that he's carrying is extraordinary. So for that performance to hold our attention, and the proposal that Ben August is making with this script is really quite unique. But let's go back to what I was saying before. Isn't it interesting? I mean, I have found it very interesting, given the response to the film, that a lot of the critical reaction is not actually looking at what an extraordinary script it is. It's we're talking about the performance and the direction, but really it starts with this amazing script that Ben August has written. And somehow, again, because it's a feature, again, the writer's role is somehow being diminished. And I find that interesting, because it is, as you said, it's an amazing story. And I wasn't planning to make another film so soon, but I mean, you can't read this story and not get excited about the possibility.
It's a film that I particularly enjoyed because Christopher Plummer is just amazing in it. I mean, he holds the whole film like in this area, right? Like it's a beautiful performance. What was the experience with him? I mean, you love that guy.
I love him. I mean, I've worked with him before in Ararat many years ago. And he knows that I am this complete fan. I mean, I saw him on stage in Broadway doing a Harold Pinter play, No Man's Land, and I was the guy who went to meet him afterwards, shaking, asking him to sign the program. So he knows that, and I've seen all his performances on stage. He's still playing like Lear. He's still doing Prospero in The Tempest. He's still doing these. He's just written and directed this one-man show. So he's still very vital. And I've also read this incredible book he's written about his life. So it was a great joy to be able to work with him again. And also, there's this amazing subtext to the performance, because when you start watching the film, you go, well, he doesn't look Jewish. And then you forget about that because the performance is so great, but then you realize that then in the film it is a performed identity, that he's not Jewish, and that actually Plummer has always played these Germanic or these Nazi roles like all through his career, and here again
he tricked us, right?
Like, he's tricked us but we've allowed ourselves to be tricked as well. I mean, there's so many clues in the film that there's something like, why can he shoot so well? How can he take 3 shots and each one is exactly right? He hits the dog, he hits the heart, he hits the head. So how did he know how to do that? And there's these different associations, but we're so convinced of this performance and this character that he has assumed that it becomes really seductive. And we are concerned for him as this frail old Jewish man looking for retribution. And that's why I think the ending is so disturbing. And we have to then imagine, how is this possible? Because it's not the dementia. This is not the result of dementia.
No, it's a blocking.
It's a selective memory, which has become like a kind of a repressed and finally a suppressed memory.
And this can happen, over decades. The more time that is passed, the more time that you're allowing yourself to actually block something out, the more possible it is that at a certain point you will not have experienced it. This is what, we know this from people who have experienced abuse or, in childhood, or, that there's this idea that you can actually completely suppress your experience of something if it's that traumatic to you. Or if the idea of being discovered, or if the idea, the film has so many suggestions in terms of what it's saying about our national or cultural shame, or, whether or not it's specific to him personally, or, did he have contact with Jewish life in Germany? Was his teacher Jewish? The composers that he mentions are all Jewish composers. How did his wife believe that he was Jewish? And then you have to look at, the nature of Jewish communities in Berlin. They were very assimilated at that time. They thought they were German, and so, there are all sorts of stories. And we talked about this a lot while we were preparing for the film. And Christopher Plummer and I had this whole map of who Zev was. But what's amazing is when you watch the film, it doesn't matter, because there is no subtext at all. He's a mystery, and he in fact is a puppet. He's being controlled by Martin Landau.
Yes.
So and Martin Landau becomes really interesting, because all this anger that you see in him, which you think is directed at the person that Zev is trying to find, is actually directed at Zev. But he's controlling this, so he becomes really interesting as well.
Yeah, he's a mastermind, really. What really shocked me when I first watched it was that at the end you feel like an accomplice,
Thank you. This is so strange about the film, and this is what's so powerful. You are implicated as if you were.
Yes.
And that's what makes it so strong, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really strong. The other thing that for me was refreshing is that we've seen so many takes on Jewish Holocaust, that type of subjects. And usually what I find is that there are these taboo subjects in cinema, right? If you want to become a popular movie, there are certain areas that you never touch, right? Like all Jewish survival people are always heroic in a way. This is a film that is so refreshing in that sense, because it takes away the taboo, and once again it feels...
And no flashbacks, and no flashbacks as well.
Exactly, no flashbacks.
Yeah.
It is amazing for me, that side of it.
Well, I think, this was really, this idea of having no flashbacks, this idea of a wholly different take, but also the sense that this was the last story you could tell about this moment in history in the present day.
Yes.
That after this, in 5 years, the survivors and the perpetrators will have passed. So this is, the last story that we're telling about this huge crime in our culture is a story of rage. Usually you think about old men, that they've come to terms with it, that they are, they've let time heal its wounds. But here we see that the wounds are very fresh. They're still raw. And also you have this character, Martin Landau, who's worked all his life with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, doing it the right way, finding the perpetrators, putting them through a criminal process. Now at the end of his life, he finds this person, and he realizes he's not ever going to go to trial. He has dementia. Yeah. And he concocts this plan where he chases himself, where he literally is chasing himself in the film. Now the question is, and this, again, I have my own opinion about it, and I don't want to, if you think otherwise, it's okay, but I don't think he's planning that the letter is going to be followed exactly. It's impossible. It's impossible that this person's going to be able to go to all these places. What he's expecting is that maybe this old man is going to be found with a gun in the middle of America, and that the media will tell the story, and that he will be discovered in a public way, and that ultimately Landau is able to actually reveal something about himself, because he would then be charged with, attempted murder, I guess. But again, the film is very mysterious. That's my own opinion. It's open to interpretation. And I think that, but overriding it all was this idea that we were telling the last story about the real people who were involved, and after this, we wouldn't be able to tell it in our time. It would be a period piece. So this carried with it a certain sense of urgency and even responsibility.
Something that I really, really enjoyed about it, and I find it very interesting, is that it has a difference in rhythm. You know, like you present us with two 90-year-old protagonists that are barely able to move fast. You know, everything feels so slow. I mean, but at the end, it feels like a thriller because they are chasing something very fast.
Right.
That difference in rhythm, I find it a great achievement of your direction.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also an achievement of my cinematographer, who I've worked with for many years, who is hand-holding for the first time, and so there's this sense of immediacy and attention that this character is being watched, and it's very, very carefully operated. But also the brilliant soundtrack by Michael Dana, who I've worked with in all my films as well, which creates this kind of almost a jittery puppet-like syncopation, and you're aware of the music creating this tension as well. And so we worked very carefully to orchestrate this. And also what's interesting is that the tension is around unexpected things. It's whether or not, his bag will be opened, or, it's like very banal things. It's not like the big things that usually inform thriller.
Cop chasing.
No, it's really about these very specific details that you've become very invested in as a viewer because you care so much about him. So it's strange that you're actually worried that someone's going to find the gun that will stop him from killing someone. That's a very strange place to put your attention, because normally it would be about whether or not someone will get hurt, not whether or not someone will get discovered in the process of trying to maybe hurt someone else, because I think you also think he's not capable of hurting anyone else, which is why when he shoots Dean Norris's character, it's so shocking. He's more than capable. He's an expert at it. He's a professional. He's done this before, and yet it doesn't register. You see it, but you don't really absorb it because we are in denial. As you said, the viewer is implicated. We are in denial of what we're seeing. We are in denial of the fact that he's apologizing to the homosexual. Why is he apologizing? We're in denial over the fact that there are a number of points in the film where our suspicion should be aroused, but it's not. And I would also say that there's this strange thing that there are these moments like the shower head, or the moments like the speaker at the bus station, where they seem like or the train, that we see. These are very strong visual images that have to do with Holocaust. But we also come to understand, when he came to America, he must have actually become a student of these films. He must have learned what it would be like to be a victim through watching films. And he's now also incorporated that in his psyche as well. So these are very complex navigations that he's made, but we are making as well because we are believing him.
We completely fell in the trap, and it's amazing. And I think it works also because it's so important that the villain is the worst history villain, the Nazis, right?
Yes.
Like, so that's why we are with him. We want him to take revenge, that he has us from the beginning. My friend, it's such a privilege to premiere this film in Mexico.
Fantastic to be here.
To have you here again, it's really, really, you honor us every year. Come back, please.
I'm honored to be here.
And right now I would like to open the floor to some questions from our members of the press, because they've seen the film already, and I'm sure after all has been discussed, we have many.
Yes.
Thanks.
Iniciamos la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. ¿Me pueden abrir el micro, por
We
favor?
have the mic over here. We'll be swift.
Welcome to Los Cabos, Mr. Just a question. The script it's based on a novel, or it was written for the film?
No, it's a completely original idea. And he's a young writer. This is his first script, Benjamin August. So that's what's... and I have to say that he was inspired to write this because his wife is Vietnamese. He's been living in Vietnam for a number of years. When he came back to America, he was shocked at how little his friends remembered the Vietnam War. And how was it possible that something so catastrophic to the American psyche could have just slipped away? And he began to look at his own background as a Jewish American, and he came up with this story. So it's really quite a brilliant stroke.
Next question, please.
Thank you. Welcome to Los Cabos, Mr. Egoyan. One question is, when you decide to film a movie, you see the commercial side of the movie, the financial success, or you choose a script that you like it, you enjoy it, and maybe that you can direct in a way that you like it?
Well, there's two different considerations. There's the decision whether or not to tell a story, but then as a producer, I have to make the decision what the budget will be. And when I make the decision about the budget, when I'm producing myself, I have to think of how large that audience will be. So some of my films I've made with no budgets, tiny budgets, because I didn't expect the audience to be large. And then other films I've made with much larger budgets, like Captive, for instance, which I produced, and with Film Farm, who are both here, Simone Erdl and Jennifer Weiss. But that's based on, the market demand. You have a sales agent, and they go out, and it's all calibrated by different issues. The genre of the film, the star who's in it, the whole package. But for many years, I never thought about that. I would say until The Sweet Hereafter, I never really thought about it. I only made these very tiny films, and each one got larger and larger as the audience began to grow. But then Felicia's Journey changed things, because this was the first time I had another producer, Icon Productions, and it was they were selling it internationally outside of what I was thinking about. And maybe these last films like Devil's Knot, or even I would say Remember, the producers are making those decisions themselves. But when I'm producing myself, I'm very aware of this question, because it determines the whole approach of how much freedom you have. And what's great is that I can make a film, like I made a film called Citadel, which is a tiny film I shot digitally in Beirut many years ago, and I only show it at festivals because it doesn't need to find distribution. I made it for no money at all, so I don't have to put it through that process at all. But the moment you start raising money from anyone, you have to be able to be responsible for that budget. It's part of your job.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Ricardo from HBO. There's a thing I found curious on the festival. I've seen 5 films so far, and four of them touches the idea of grief, or the action start after the death of someone. I guess for both of you, do you think it's only a coincidence, or have some relation between what is happening nowadays, or movies? It's an important thing.
Well, I've worked with grief as a theme in a lot of my films. I mean, from the very early films, there's always been someone missing, and there's always been these characters trying to negotiate this absence. And I've always found that film is an amazing medium to deal with grief, because the visual representation of a lost one becomes so haunting and so immediate. And so when I'm talking about this structure I've used before, this non-linear structure, many of the times the characters are in a state of grief, and they're trying to sort out their lives. And the structure reflects this sense of being in suspension, being in a state of shock. This is what Noah Render says in The Adjuster. He keeps telling people they're in a state of shock. But I think if you look at films from Family Viewing to Exotica, Sweet Hereafter, Adoration, Captive, these characters are in this state of shock, and they're trying to reassemble the pieces. But the viewer is aware of these images which are so clear. Like, there they are. These people are on screen, but they're not there in the presence of these people's lives. And so that becomes a very compelling and specific thing that cinema is able to achieve through, it starts with, to me, like Vertigo, and Hitchcock, very often is dealing with this notion of absence, but also goes back to Fritz Lang as well. There's these amazing films that are not really known, early Lang, where he's dealing with experiences that people have had that they have to reconsider from different points of view. And it always has to do with technology as well. Like, I think Lang is an incredible filmmaker with films like Lilium, where he's dealing with technology and memory and loss and grief in a very radical and avant-garde way, you know, from the 30s. So it's always been there in cinema. You know, it's always been this idea that cinema can present us with something that's a ghost image. And it's a beautiful aspect of what the form is able to deal with.
I mean, for us, as when we program the festival, it's not that we're thinking of a specific thematics. I think it is a coincidence in a way, but maybe not, because filmmakers, you can find currents and thematic currents, you know, every time. I guess the gentleman is mentioning because another Canadian filmmaker this year is Jean-Marc Vallée, and
Yes.
Demolition deals with grief again.
Right.
You can find some you know, lines between different directors. For example, with Canadians, I found, and I wonder actually, my friend, because for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been seeing a lot of films, Canadian films, related to a notion of stress about losing a kid. You had it in The Captive. We saw Prisoners
Right.
from Denis Villeneuve.
Right.
This year we have Room, which
Right.
which talks about, again, like a captive person. It's interesting for me, at least as a programmer. I mean, it's not the reason why we program, because obviously what we're just trying to put together is a program where we follow auteurs, you know, like strong voices that are challenging themselves and are reflecting on what cinema means. But it is interesting from the other side to see these common lines, this
Well,
constellation of
I also think it's this characters who are somehow trying to find a way of repairing themselves. Like, I look at a film like Exotica now, which was like 22 years ago. But this character who has lost a daughter, but you know, reconstructs her in this very strange club, you know, and kind of creates this therapeutic process that he thinks is healing himself, but in fact it's exaggerating the loss. You know, what psychologists call a process of faulty mourning. Faulty, that you're mourning, but you're not mourning in the right way. And you're creating a pattern which actually extends and accentuates the sense of loss, rather than deals with the healing of it. And I think, again, it goes back to this question that cinema offers this sense of recuperation, but it's also it's almost like a drug, right? It's not a viable or permanent experience, and yet we look to cinema to provide some sort of stories that will help us direct our own lives, and yet we're not in a film. You know, this is our life. There's that great line in Leonard Cohen, one of the last songs. You know, you live your life as if it's real. You know, which is just like such a beautiful line. You know, but I think that maybe this is what some of the, and maybe it is maybe there is this more of that in Canada for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure. I'm not an academic, so I can't really locate it. But it's interesting as a phenomenon.
It is.